This is the training module for 2019 Annual Inspector Training. To receive credit for this course, watch the video and then complete the quiz and email it to me and I'll get you updated in Saturn. There are two parts to this video. The first part is for everybody, regardless of what kind of inspector you are. The second part is only for people who work in QA. There's two ways to ensure that products conform to quality specification. The first way is prevention, and the second way is inspection. And of course, as inspectors, 99% of the time, we are concerned with inspection. So that's what we're going to focus on here. Quality specifications come in many forms. They could be in the form of engineering drawings, schematics, work instructions, technical orders, mil specs, industry standards, and manufacturer's maintenance manual. It's important to realize that sometimes the work instructions we use to produce new components or maintain assets have references to external quality standards. Inspectors should always be vigilant and research these external requirements. Here's two examples. This is a test plan, which is essentially a set of work instructions that detail how to environmentally test an object. And you can see in the highlighted area that the engineer specifies a third-party document for test points. The inspector assigned to this test should research all those third-party documents to ensure that all these test point quality requirements are being met. This is another example of an engineering drawing that outlines the construction of a switch panel. And in the notes, you could see that the engineer is calling out for chemical conversion, and he specifies a mil detailed specification. The inspector who is looking at this should look up that mil specification to ensure that we're meeting those quality requirements. Now, if for whatever reason we can't meet those quality requirements, maybe we don't have the capabilities, or maybe it's not feasible for whatever reason, then we have a couple of options available to us. The inspector could have a conversation with the engineer. Maybe they'll decide to outsource conversion coding, or possibly maybe the engineer might change the requirement and make it less stringent. Whatever the course of action is, it's important that our drawing or work instructions match the actual configuration of the part. And so if a change is made, you're going to have to redline the drawings or get waiver approval as necessary. There are three types of inspections. You have receiving inspection, which typically takes place in the warehouse. And they're looking to make sure that parts that are coming in from vendors conform to quality requirements. And those are usually specified in contracts or purchase orders. And then you have in-process inspections. These inspections typically take place during the fabrication of a product or during a maintenance process while it's happening. You also have final inspection, which comes at the end of an assembly or a fabrication of a part or the end of a final maintenance process. Most of us are familiar with in-process inspection and final inspection. And I'd kind of like to talk about in-process inspections for a minute. A lot of times the work instructions that we're using, the drawings, whatever, they don't specify everything you should be looking at. And so if we wait to look at that product in the final inspection stage, we've probably missed some important quality requirements that we should have been looking at while the product was being produced. And so I'm going to go over a couple of examples here. Let's consider this example of this composite structure. So let's say it was being fabricated per a drawing. And I came in at the very end and I started looking at it and I started measuring it, for dimensional accuracy. Well, that's not enough. During the process of this part being fabricated, there's all kinds of things that I should probably be looking at as an inspector. One of those things is that when they're mixing the epoxy, it comes in a two-part kit and there's mix instructions, and typically they're very specific and it's got to be weighed out because it's got to be mixed by either weight or sometimes volume. And so if I didn't witness that, I can't really give any assurances as the inspector that that was done correctly, and that could compromise the strength of this structure. Sometimes the instructions that we're using don't explicitly state these inspection points, but we know from our experience as inspectors that these are things we should be looking at. And if we're not familiar with the process, we need to familiarize ourselves with the process so that we're looking for these important steps. Continuing on with our composite structure example, composite structures are anisotropic, which means they have more strength in one direction than another. And so to counter this, you typically lie the plies in different orientations, sometimes 45 degrees, sometimes 15 degrees. But the point is if I were to wait until the final assembly, I wouldn't know for sure that this was done correctly. And so that would be an important point that I would want to witness. Here's another example. After the fabrication of the part, the work order says to paint it. And so I come in right at the end and I say, yeah, it was painted. Well, that's not enough. Surface coatings are only as good as the preparation that went into them. The parts have to be clean. And so, it's my job as an inspector, even though maybe the work order didn't specify to check that the part was clean prior to painting, I should be familiar enough with the process to know, hey, I should go in here and make sure it's clean. I should be checking the shelf life on these chemicals to make sure they're still good. It's your right as an inspector to let those techs, to let those mechanics know that you want to check something out prior to moving on, even if it's not specified as an inspection. And remember, just because, we ask to see things doesn't mean we don't trust people doing the work. Inspection is just a higher form of product assurance. And that's something that NASA values very highly. And this is the importance of planning. If you know that you're going to be inspecting a certain component or a certain job, let the techs know, let the mechanics know, hey, these are the things I want to look at, even if it's not explicitly stated in the work instructions. You could always work with engineers as well to have them add inspection points into test plans or work orders. That's not uncommon because they don't always know what all the requirements are. It's also a good idea to encourage people to include you in the planning and to let you know when these inspections are coming up so that there are no surprises. They're not going to come to you at the final product and say, hey, can you inspect this? And then you need to make them have them tear it down because you missed some important in-process inspections. In addition to our inspection duties, we have other inherent responsibilities as inspectors. We need to make sure that the working environment is safe. We need to check people and make sure that they're wearing their fall protection properly, that they have the proper clothing, jewelry, etc. We need to make sure people are trained and certified. When's the last time you were performing an inspection and you went and verified the training records of somebody? Well, that is your right and a responsibility as an inspector, but that often gets overlooked. You want to make sure that equipment is properly maintained, that the PMs are being performed, on the schedule. You want to make sure that, calibration is being performed, that they're not using equipment that's out of cal. Shelf life, I already talked about that. Tool control. You want to make sure that they're following the tool control program and that they're doing their inventories as required. And remember, just because you're working in the back shop doesn't necessarily exclude you from the tool control program. If you are working on something that's going to end up on the aircraft, you're still required to do a closeout inspection. We verify part numbers and serial numbers and make sure they match up with what's in NamUs or other documentation. And of course, everyone's favorite, aircraft documentation, making sure it's in NamUs. AFOP 8730.5-007. That is Armstrong's local quality assurance procedures. And last year we moved a lot of our other documents into this one. And one of those sections is stamp control. And so if you look in the section for stamp control, one of the things it talks about is it outlines your duties and your role as an inspector. And so one of your duties is to always apply your stamp impression clearly. Ensure that your stamp impressions are always accompanied by the date of acceptance. And so get in the habit, every time you make a stamp impression, just write the date next to it. Check that your stamps are serviceable regularly. Complete your annual inspector training prior to your due date. Never inspect your own work. Only attest to the accomplishment of product assurance actions for processes that you examined, witnessed, or verified the data. Understand the scope of your privileges as they're defined in your appointing orders. If you ever need a copy of your orders, let me know. You're expected to turn in your stamp when they're unserviceable, when your employment is terminated, when you transfer to another position outside the scope of your inspection privileges, and when you're instructed to by the Quality Assurance Department. You have to provide the inspection stamp custodian with an impression for annual inventory every year. And you should notify the Quality Assurance Branch Chief if you witness violations of these procedures. Most importantly, never allow anybody to use your inspection privileges on your behalf. Never give anybody your password to the work order system or NAVIS. Never give anybody your physical stamp. If you lose a stamp, it's not the end of the world, but you do need to let us know as soon as possible. I've had people come to me after losing their stamp and it's been missing for weeks, and I'll ask them, why are you just now letting me know? And they were hoping it was going to turn up. And I could understand this, but NASA takes stamp traceability very seriously. And so please, if you know that your stamp's missing, if you're a civil servant, let me know. If you're a contract inspector, let your management know and do a lost stamp report right away. That way we can document it. The last thing I want to say, and this is something that I tell everybody when I do the initial inspector training, is that when you step into that role as an inspector, no matter who you are, when you put on that hat as an inspector, you are representing the Quality Assurance Branch, and you're inspecting on behalf and at the discretion of the Quality Assurance Branch Chief. And so always remember that, yes, you belong to your branch, and yes, you have to answer to your boss. But at the end of the day, when you're performing those inspections, you're performing them on behalf of the Quality Assurance Branch. And that being said, if you ever feel like you need support or you have questions, you can always reach out to us. This concludes Module 1. If you're a designated inspector from Life Support or Quality Assurance, please go on. Everybody else can stop here. In this second module, we're going to review how to review a work request and put it into history. AFOP 7900.3-026, that's aircraft documentation. Paragraph 6.12 outlines the procedures for changing a work request to historical. The first thing you want to look at is the corrective action and make sure that whatever was written was appropriate for the discrepancy and that it was complete. You want to look at the work request and make sure that it's being properly identified as being up or down. You want to look at the technical reference block and make sure that the correct tech references were entered. You want to look at all blocks and make sure that they've all been filled in correctly. Something that gets missed a lot is the hours block. Sometimes people don't add their name, and it will let you sign it off without entering a name. You want to click the Review Items button on the Maintenance Action page and on the Work Request page, and make sure that no review items were generated. If they were, they need to be corrected prior to signing off that work request. You want to check the signatures and make sure that the work request has the appropriate number of signatures. Perhaps you need to add another one, Maybe you need signatures on the steps tab. You want to make sure that all LLC data is correct, and you also want to check associated templates and make sure that they were recalculated correctly. You can do this by going to the work request tab and then going down to the template block and clicking on the view button. You want to check that all calibrated tools, oil servicing carts, hydraulic power units are properly documented, as well as toolboxes, and that those are entered on the work request. And finally, you should check that all the necessary attachments have been attached. Once you've done all this, you can sign it and put it into history. And remember, if you inadvertently put it into history, contact the Aircraft Records branch to get it reopened. This is the training module for 2019 Annual Inspector.